Good morning to our colleagues in Washington, D.C., and good late afternoon to Dr. Rudy Baroudi in Doha. My name is Sasha Toporich, and I'm a Senior Vice President at the TLN, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to our yet another discussion on the Eastern Mediterranean. Our panelists today are top-notch experts in their respective work, and surely we'll spend a dynamic hour together. As part of our ongoing commitment to contribute to the success of the Eastern Mediterranean, TLN has launched East Med Quarterly Newsletter, a platform to share forward-thinking ideas how to tackle problems the region is continuing to face. I'd like to thank TLN Distinguished Energy Fellow Deborah Kagan for co-editing the newsletter with me, and thank you, Jonathan Roberts, TLN Project Manager, and your team for putting it together in that brilliant way. For those who didn't have a chance to read it, please visit our website at transatlantic.org. Besides great discussion awaiting us today, this event marks yet another remarkable occasion, a launching of foreign language ebook editions of Dr. Baroudi's Maritime Disputes in the Eastern Mediterranean, The Way Forward publication. It is the first ever foreign language editions, both for the TLN and for the Brookings Institution Press. And I'd like to congratulate all and thank the great people from Brookings Press that worked tirelessly and committedly to bring this to light. I'm sure General Allen, who is with us today and will address us momentarily, is pleased to hear this. And since General's schedule is pretty tight, it's a true honor to introduce him and to welcome him at our event today. General Allen is a retired U.S. Marine Corps four-star general and current president of the Brookings Institution. He was a former commander of the NATO International Security Assistance Force and the commander of the U.S. forces in Afghanistan. He was appointed by President Obama as special presidential envoy for the global coalition to counter ISIL. Upon receiving the rank of the U.S. general, he served as the principal director of Asian and Pacific Affairs in the Office of the U.S. Secretary of Defense. General Allen served as the commanding general during the Operation Iraqi Freedom, including as a temporary U.S. Central Command commander. General Allen received numerous foreign awards, including first-class Mongolian Medal, Polish Army Gold Medal, Taiwan Order, French Legion of Honor, Italian Order of Merit, Honorary Office of Order of Australia, and many, many others. General, we thank you for being with us today. We appreciate your time, and the microphone is yours, sir.
Sasha, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I deeply appreciate it. And it really is a great pleasure and an honor to join you, but also to join the Transatlantic Leadership Network this morning for this very important introduction. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen in the United States, and good afternoon, good evening to our dear friends and colleagues coming in from overseas. As Sasha mentioned, I'm John Allen, and I'm the president of the Brookings Institution. And I'm really most pleased to welcome you all to this book launch of the foreign language editions of the Maritime Disputes in the Eastern Mediterranean, The Way Forward, by Dr. Rudy Baroudi. Now, originally published earlier this year, Maritime Disputes has fast become a crucial book on the many energy issues and dynamics that impact the Eastern Mediterranean. Written by Dr. Baroudi, who is the current CEO of Energy and Environment Holding and boasts 40 years of experience in the energy industry, to include in support of project and program development with the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and others. Maritime Disputes offers insights into an issue that intersects with the likes of maritime boundaries, exclusive economic zones, and offshore energy exploration and development. A very complex series of issues. And indeed, when thinking of the Eastern Mediterranean more broadly, one cannot help but to think of the late Alfred Thayer Mahan, the great theorist about naval power that is adhered to so much by the United States Navy, that, quote, the history of sea power is largely, though by no means solely, a narrative of contests between nations and of mutual rivalries, unquote. So be it the Phoenicians establishing their trading network in the Mediterranean, the battle for supremacy between Carthage and Rome, or the Romans who would term the Mediterranean as Mare Nostrum, our sea, the North African campaign in World War II, or the humanitarian crises of irregular migration around and through the Mediterranean, that sea has long served as both a literal crossroads and a theater for competition and conflict. More so in 2009 with the discovery of natural gas. The region has now been under very heavy scrutiny and increasing contestation, driving further competition among a handful of the countries along the periphery and in the Mediterranean itself: France, Egypt, Turkey, Greece, Israel, Cyprus, and Lebanon. The Eastern Mediterranean now has often been seen as an area primed for potential instability and even escalation or worse, conflict, and we hope it doesn't come to that. Recognizing the precarious nature of the region, then, it's with the greatest enthusiasm and interest that we should all celebrate these new translations of the book, Maritime Disputes. Available now for readers in French, in Arabic, and Greek. Maritime Disputes offers important access and insights for the many policymakers, researchers, and scholars who are considering this very complex and even complicated matter. I have no doubt that in time, maritime disputes will be considered an essential global research as nations continue to deliberate on the matters of the Eastern Mediterranean and energy security, and more broadly, the security nature of the interaction of societies in that region. So with that, let me turn the floor over to my old friend, Deb Kagan. Now, I've stopped using the term old friend because now, having reached the point of being old myself, I'd like to use the word distinguished friend. So let me turn the panel over to my distinguished friend, Deb Kagan, who we've served together in a number of important positions over the years. And she'll be helping to produce the analysis and the state of play today in this session. So Deb, the floor is yours, and it's wonderful to see all of you this morning. And my sincere congratulations again to Dr. Baroudi.
Thank you so much, General Allen, for that lovely introduction. And we also look forward to a great discussion today. And thank you again. Sasha, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Deborah, and thank you, General, for such an inspiring remarks indeed. You surely set an excellent tone for the discussion amongst the panelists today. Before I myself leave you in great hands of our distinguished energy fellow, Deborah Kagan, a well-known career State Department diplomat and Defense Department official from Reagan to Trump administration, who also served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary and Senior Director of European, Russian, and Eurasian security issues, among many other important responsibilities she held. We have another special guest with us today, and that is Yelba Queen, the Associate Director at the Brookings Institution Press, who I cannot praise enough. I want to extend you, Yelba, the gratitude on behalf of the entire TLN for truly great work you and your team do at the Brookings Press and do with us. We're very, very excited to be the organization that contributed to this first ever foreign language ebooks, as much as I'm sure Dr. Baroudi is delighted that it is his book that made the mark. But for all of you listening to this event today, and for those of you that will watch it on our YouTube channel later on in coming days, French and Greek versions indeed are available now at the Brookings Press, and by the end of the month, we will upload the Arabic version as well. Truly working with the folks at the Brookings Press and under your baton, Yelba, as Associate Director, it has been and is ongoing pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for all you do, and microphone is yours.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Sasha. It's so great to be a part of this this morning here in Alexandria, and colleagues, friends, and distinguished guests around the world. Thank you so much for joining us here today. As the Assistant Director of the Brookings Institution Press, it's my distinct pleasure to congratulate the Transatlantic Leadership Network and Dr. Rudy Baroudi on the publication of Maritime Disputes in the Eastern Mediterranean, The Way Forward. The Brookings Institution is widely known as a source for innovative thought in foreign policy, American politics, governance, and current affairs. Publishing has been an integral part of this mission. Through our publications, the Brookings Institution Press advances knowledge and adds to the scholarly conversation both within and outside of the institution. Maritime Disputes in the Eastern Mediterranean is proudly distributed to the trade by the Brookings Institution Press. And for over 100 years, the press has helped bring knowledge and research by scholars to a wider audience of readers, researchers, students, and policymakers. The books we publish and distribute inform with clarity and persuade with conviction. And Dr. Baroudi's new book is one such publication. I'm wholly impressed by the original thinking, comprehensive research, and convincing rhetoric employed by Dr. Baroudi to make his case for maritime boundary delimitation in the Eastern Mediterranean. Maritime Disputes has turned a new page for the Brookings Institution Press. The ebook is available in French, Arabic, and Greek, and it is the first publication within the press available in multiple languages. In conclusion, I, along with our director, Bill Finan, and our team here at the press, offer our heartfelt congratulations to Dr. Baroudi, the Transatlantic Leadership Network, and the team behind the scenes for this accomplishment. And like all of our publications, I'm sure this book will inspire thoughtful conversation. To end, allow me to offer my encouragement to all of you to pick up a copy of this insightful book at our website, brookings.edu/BI Press. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Yelba, so much. Godspeed. And for sure, we'll talk very soon today. And before my last duty to briefly introduce the distinguished panel, let me just add how we appreciate Dr. Baroudi's work as it intends to contribute in clearing the fog of political misinformation currently muddying public fora when we discuss the issues in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is exactly what the TLN is committed to do in our ongoing effort in the East Med. Your work, Rudy, using precise satellite imagery, trajectory, and delineating lines promotes cooperation and shifting the narrative from blame to genuine dialogue and compromise. Equitable solutions should be the baseline of discussions and negotiations to these issues at hand. Any maximalist approach by anyone is doomed to fail and doesn't produce progress. Your books, though, shift yet another narrative. It encourages us all to look even beyond possible maritime agreements and solutions reached to a broader, long-lasting peace that can be achieved in the wider Mediterranean and in the Middle East. And while the UNCLOS provide a base to addressing these issues in case of disputes, one cannot promote maximalist approach under the international law simply, as plenty of cases that the law handed us by the international courts point out significantly from deviance from the equidistance rule. As a Lebanese-born man who wears numerous hats, from the economist, consultant, development expert, contract negotiator, and a long list of sectors within the energy industry. Your work in oil and gas, onshore, offshore exploration with the World Bank, EU, UN, dealing with the carbon trading mechanisms, long-term supplies, etc. You are really a synonym of word cosmopolitan. And above all this, you're a person who genuinely works for peace. And that's what I appreciate the most, your determination and courage. And to that end, ongoing contribution. I salute you to that and congratulate you for launching the foreign language edition of your book. I'm sure you are equally excited to be today with two very, very, very distinguished individuals joining us from Washington, D.C., who actually reviewed your book, as you know. So, and those who read it may have read those review inside as well. I'm pleased to extend a very warm welcome to Andrew Novo. Andrew is an associate professor of strategic studies at the National University in Washington, D.C. He studied classics at Princeton and received his master's degree in international relations and PhD in a modern history from St. Antony's College at the University of Oxford. An expert in ancient and modern Mediterranean history, strategic studies, international relations, and military history, Dr. Novo has taught at the Georgetown University and lectured at the University of Cyprus, the United States Military Academy, and the US Naval Academy. Andrew also spent 3 years living in Cyprus, where he taught at the European University in Nicosia and conducted research for his doctoral degree. Andrew, welcome. Great to have you with us. And Douglas Hengel, who is an adjunct professor at the Johns Hopkins Schools of Advanced International Studies, SAIS. There he teaches the geopolitics of energy. He's also senior non-residential fellow at the German Marshall Fund in the US and a senior consultant for LNG Allies, an energy trade association. Professor Hengel had an impressive diplomatic career, working extensively on global economic issues, in particular energy and economic sanctions. He is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Energy, Sanctions and Commodities, where he formulated and advanced US international energy policy. Gentlemen, honored to have you with us. Welcome both. Deborah, take a torch, and I look forward to listening to dynamic discussions today.
Good morning. Thank you. Just took me a second there to unmute. So welcome, everyone. And I think we don't want to spend a lot more time here, so I'd like to get started. So I'd like to call on Dr. Baroudi to kick off this conversation. If you would please take your time, give us a couple of words, and then you'll be followed by Professor Novo and then Professor Hengel. Rudy, over to you.
Okay. Well, first of all, Deborah, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the kind introduction that Sasha has given. And I'm also very grateful for all of the support I've received from TLN and the excellent work from Brookings Institution Press. I'm very flattered to be among you, among this distinguished panel. And I'm very happy that I'm meeting for the first time some of you virtually. I have tried very hard to write this book, and this is something like for over 15 to 20 years, I have always been very much interested in the Euromed and the EastMed. So I've always thought that this part of the world should have some oil and gas. In the 90s, they used to laugh at me when I used to come from time to time from Houston to Cyprus to Lebanon. But right now, after the year 2001, 2002, 2003, with all of the seismic work, we did find the hydrocarbon potential. This book is to try to make a positive impact on the lives of ordinary people, like all of us and like all of the EastMed. So I have to be thankful for the extraordinary support that I have received from policymakers, students, scholars, universities, NGOs, the last 2 decades. The whole point of a book like this is to get as many people as possible on the same proverbial page. I've tried to frame the issues at stake in a way that cuts across the borders and rises above traditional rivalries, appealing to groups and individuals with different concerns and different perspectives. I did not invent the solutions discussed in the book. That was the work of dedicated diplomats, lawyers, scientists, and economists. Instead, I have merely tried to describe the tools that we have today. They have made available to spread awareness, to disseminate knowledge of the future they make possible. It's not just the makers and implementers of government policy who need to know about maritime boundaries and how to resolve them peacefully. It's everyone who cares about living in a world governed by clear and consistent rules rather than raw power. It's anyone who understands that sound public policy can be perfectly consistent with the profit motive, anyone who believes in the possibility of peace, security, and anyone who accepts the obligation that each generation has to the next, i.e., to leave our world in a better and safer state than we found it. Most of all, I wrote this book for those who refuse to be taken by the notion that difference is destiny. There is no dispute that cannot be overcome by decent people seeking decent futures. It's only fitting, therefore, that my book be translated into several languages, and I'm really grateful one more time to TLN and to Brookings for making this happen. Thanks for you all for participating and giving me the chance to answer any Q&A that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Baroudi. Without further ado, can I ask you, Dr. Nova, to please take the floor?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Deborah. Can everyone hear me all right? Does the sound okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. I'd like to thank the Transatlantic Leadership Network for the invitation to participate in today's panel. Thanks to Sasha and to Deborah for arranging everything. Before I begin, I'll give my little DoD disclaimer that whatever I say doesn't represent the National Defense University, the Department of Defense, or the United States government more generally. They're just my own views. However, speaking from the perspective of someone who works in the DoD every day, I want to start by mentioning that the Eastern Mediterranean has assumed a certain degree of importance for the United States precisely because of some of the issues raised in Dr. Baroudi's excellent book, not least energy discoveries and the geopolitical and geoeconomic implications resulting from them. I mean, the Eastern Mediterranean, after all, represents the frontier of both NATO in terms of Greece and Turkey and the European Union through Greece and Cyprus. It embraces Israel, a key American ally, and current politics in the Eastern Mediterranean touches on several critical ongoing conflicts: the Syrian civil war, disputes between Israel and its neighbors, and even violence in Iraq. There's also Russian involvement in the region, and that remains a concern for American policymakers, as does Iranian influence in Iraq, in Syria, and in Lebanon. Energy discoveries and energy production have only served to heighten the region's importance. The sale of Israeli gas to Egypt and the potential exports of gas from Egypt, Cyprus, and Israel to Europe add to the region's economic and political significance. For Israel, gas discoveries mean a new focus west toward the sea, pursued in conjunction with its traditional orientation towards a security architecture focused on its land borders. These economic opportunities have created new political realities, which I think all the countries of the region are trying to negotiate. Egypt, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, Italy, and Jordan, for example, recently signed an agreement creating the East Mediterranean Gas Forum. France has applied to join, and the United States has asked for observer status. This is just one of a number of agreements among various governments in various triads and 3+1 formulas. It highlights the new ways countries in the region are trying to coordinate efforts and improve stability and productivity in the region. And in this context of improving stability, the United States has strengthened its relationships with both Greece and Cyprus. Public statements and practical actions during the past several years have clearly demonstrated a positive trend in these two bilateral relationships. A new defense agreement in 2019 between Athens and Washington gave American forces increased freedom to use Greece's seaport infrastructure. American companies and the American military are building relationships in and around the northern Greek port of Alexandroupolis, expanding America's investment in and involvement with the port. America is expanding its base in Suda Bay, Crete, amid speculation that various military assets might be transferred there from Incirlik on a permanent basis. Secretary Pompeo, of course, has been fairly active in the region. He's visited both Greece and Cyprus recently in a show of support, expressing concern for various Turkish operations in the area. Cypriot-American relations have also improved. In August 2019, Cyprus's first military attaché to the United States assumed his duties in Washington. In July 2020, Cyprus was added to the list of countries eligible for international military education and training, IMET, which my college does some work with, for IMET funding and cooperation beginning in the 2021 financial year. In September, Secretary Pompeo communicated to President Anastasiades of Cyprus that America would temporarily lift the international traffic in arms regulation ban on the export of non-lethal defense articles to Cyprus. So there have been a lot of positive steps in those two bilateral relationships. In addition to that, we've seen new elections in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. This has created conditions for potential renewal of settlement talks on the island, but the significant obstacles impeding an agreement that impeded an agreement in the past remain. And of course, these difficulties have been compounded by Ersin Tatar's public and controversial support for a two-state solution in Cyprus. So there's room for optimism, and there are also some familiar problems which are going to have to be solved one way or the other. So I look forward to the rest of the discussion and to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I appreciate that great tour d'horizon of the region and what's going on there. That's very helpful. And now, Professor Hengel, if you could enlighten us on the broader issues involving energy in this region. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you to TLN and in particular to Sasha and Deborah for inviting me to participate in this event. this morning, I thought I would try to put the energy resources of this region into a more global context. So I think it's fair to say that in recent years, natural gas has played a significant and growing role in meeting global energy demand. Over the last 20 years, demand for natural gas has grown about 2.5% per year. And that's been driven by several factors, I think. Gas has been plentiful, in part because of the shale revolution in the United States, but not only, also due to discoveries elsewhere. Energy markets have been liberalized most places around the world, and reforms to spur competition. And there's been a great growth in the trade of liquefied natural gas. And all these factors have led to better pricing for gas and helping to boost its demand. It's also, there are clear environmental benefits from burning natural gas compared to other fossil fuels, especially in terms of air quality. And this has been an important driver of growth for gas demand, particularly in Asia. Now we have COVID to deal with, but natural gas has been less impacted, the demand for gas less impacted by COVID-19 than for oil or coal. And the International Energy Agency is estimating that demand for gas is going to decline only by about 3% this year, much more for coal and oil. But the future of natural gas is rather uncertain. There's a divergence of views about where the future of gas lies and the energy world that will emerge from today's pandemic. Some believe that demand for gas will bounce back strongly after COVID. The trend will be much like before. Maybe demand growth will be a little bit less, but they'll continue to grow. That there's continuing need to address energy poverty, unmet energy demand around the world, and it does have a lower emissions profile. So the future for gas could be bright. The International Energy Agency sees gas demand growing by about 1.2% a year out to 2040, about half the rate of the last 20 years in its so-called stated policy scenario, which is essentially business as usual with what governments say they're going to do in terms of energy policies. But in their more aggressive climate scenario, the sustainable development scenario, which would mean we'd be in a world headed to under 2 degree increase in global temperatures. So to meet the Paris Agreement, gas demand globally actually declines slightly out to 2030 and beyond. And a number of other organizations, companies, and consultancies have released energy outlooks in recent months, and they come to similar conclusions. Under something like a business as usual scenario, gas demand would continue to grow, but at a slower rate. But in aggressive climate scenarios, gas demand may rise for a few years, if at all, and then begin to decline perhaps quite sharply. So gas remains plentiful and relatively cheap, but it's running into more competition from renewables and alternative low carbon gases, including hydrogen perhaps in the future. So and also companies and governments are pledging that they will reach carbon neutrality by 2050 or 2060 in the case of China. This leaves less room for unabated burning of natural gas. For example, in Europe, their Green Deal, the demand for natural gas could drop quite sharply from 2030 or even before. So uncertainties about natural gas demand going forward. We've seen also in the meantime, oil and gas companies are cutting back on their investments because of lower prices. ExxonMobil just announced some major retrenchment on Monday. The IEA estimates that oil and gas company investments in 2020 are going to drop by about 1/3 compared to last year. Also, investors are looking more skeptically at the oil and gas sector, driven not just by concerns about financial performance, but also by doubts about the compatibility of traditional company strategies with growing social and environmental pressures. So most the IEA and others think that oil and gas companies are likely to focus on projects where they're not only very low cost, but also low emissions intensities. And the IEA noted in particular in their recent World Energy Outlook that higher cost development projects look increasingly difficult to justify, particularly in Europe, and they cite the UK continental shelf and the Eastern Mediterranean, as well as some other parts of the world. So coming to the East Med, if you have an outlook for flat or declining demand for natural gas in Europe and globally, plus a challenging geopolitical environment in the region, that's likely to be a major handicap for upstream investment, at least in the waters offshore of Cyprus. The resources discovered there to date are not huge. There are significant geopolitical challenges, and with the budgets of the oil and gas companies constrained, any investment there is going to have to compete against opportunities that are available elsewhere, whether in the US shale patch, in the Middle East, South Africa, where there have been some recent discoveries, Mozambique, and elsewhere. I think the resources in Israeli and Egyptian waters are going to be less impacted by these geopolitics, but the demand outlook may cloud the picture for development even there. The economic returns that companies can expect are going to be critical. Again, you're competing against opportunities elsewhere. So pricing in different markets and export opportunities are going to be quite important. Turkey is the regional market that's likely to have the fastest demand growth. There are contracts coming up for renegotiation there, import contracts for gas, but they appear to be out of the picture, and we could talk about that. And there's going to be exports from outside the immediate region that are going to be tough competition for any gas coming out of the Eastern Med. I'm thinking LNG from the United States, from Qatar, from Russia, Nigeria, and elsewhere. So the regional market may make the most sense for the resources from that region. And also the window for new investment may be closing. So I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Doug. I really appreciate that. And I think that that our three speakers and our panelists today have given us quite a lot to think about. And so I'm going to take moderator's prerogative and ask some initial questions. And I'm going to put individual panelists on the spot as well. Just my promise to all of you. So I think that all of our panelists here today can agree that if all parties in the Eastern Mediterranean are to ever fully benefit from the exploitation of these resources and any future ones, and that could include development of renewables, for example, a new pragmatic approach must be implemented. And that none of us, I think, on this panel, myself included, are under any illusion that such agreements will lead to a resolution of intractable, hundreds-of-year-old disagreements between these countries. In short, we're not really looking for peace in our time, but we're looking for a pragmatic approach that can seek agreement on some fundamental issues that could yield both cooperative technology and revenue sharing going forward. And so with all of that in mind, I want to first turn to Rudy and say, what do you believe are the three critical pieces on this technical pragmatic approach that need to happen to get a conversation going among Greece, Turkey, and Cyprus that that could make this a much more hospitable environment for both companies and for the betterment of the economic situation of all of these countries? I think you need to unmute, Rudy. Rudy, can you unmute?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, but perfect. Thank
Okay.
you.
First of all, I want to thank very much Mr. Novo for a very well analysis on the EastMed and the cost and the monies, and this is very true. If the EastMed will find more gas or more oil and gas, it should serve their own region first, and that's quite true. And maybe in 5 years' time, things could change. Now to come back to your question, Deborah, the first and most important thing that Greece and Turkey, they have to do is that both of them, they have to sit down and face their common enemy. In my view, their common enemy is the past. They were not there. Prime Minister Mitsotakis, President Erdogan, they were not there in 1923. They were not there in 1949. So all of these islands, Asian dispute are coming from the last 60, 70, 80 years, from Sykes-Picot till today. Greece and Turkey, they need to re-engage through their established diplomatic committees that they have. They have been meeting for the last 4 or 5 years over 10 times. And once they are serious about the rapprochement, Turkey and Greece, they have almost 485 nautical miles of maritime boundaries from the tri-junction point, which is west of Cyprus, straight to a land terminus point. There is no dispute, and they both agree that they have a land terminus point on the far northern edge of the Aegean Sea towards the west. So once this is agreed, they have, like Sasha has said, with the new imagery and technology and satellite mapping, they can both determine a strict equidistance line that will draw that line. Now, Turkey has on the Mediterranean, not talking about the Black Sea, they have 3 maritime boundaries. They can solve that. Once they solve this, Cyprus has 5 maritime boundaries. Among those 5, 2 of them, they are treated. One is with Israel and Egypt in 2003, and one between Cyprus and Israel in 2010. So this is the second major component. The third component is for a third party, like for example, the US could come and bring both parties to a table and negotiate according to the law of the book what each one gets. Now, the overlapping claim between Turkey and Greece is not very big. It's around 71,000 square kilometers. This is, and if they play it by the book, everybody can live in peace. They can enjoy the blue economy. The blue economy is not just the resources. It's everything that they have, the biodiversity, the fishery, the windmill, everything could be sorted out where both, and Cyprus as a coming in, could come in for the prosperity too. I hope that I answered your question, Deborah.
Yes, thank you so much. Andrew, can I ask you to comment on the same thing, if you'd share your perspective on the same issue, if you would, please?
Well, in the fine traditions of political science, you asked for a sort of a Trinitarian, a holy Trinitarian response. So I'll give you 3 points. I'll honor that. So the first is, as Rudy makes the point in the book many times, we need to move away from the gunboat diplomacy. This is a phrase Rudy uses many times in the book, and it's a good way of seeing it, that the gunboat diplomacy that we've seen, and various kinds of behavior which is meant to be provocative, putting that to the side would be one good way for progress in this, because it doesn't do anyone any good to be on a sort of heightened alert. You hear a lot in the media. We even heard earlier in this panel, that there's tension, and there are fears that this tension could explode, could ignite, could become more serious. So the first is to end the gunboat diplomacy. The second I would suggest is a certain degree of realism and reassessment and practical reassessment of what we're dealing with in terms of gas. I mean, I defer to my colleagues' expertise on the gas issue, but just from sort of on the anecdotal level, in the Cypriot context, in a Greek context, there's been a little bit of a kind of up and down of, oh wow, there's so much gas, we're going to be Dubai, we're going to be Qatar, we're going to be so wealthy. I mean, there's gas there, but it's not like that. And I think a degree of realism of, these countries are not going to become Qatar. They're not going to become UAE. They're not even going to become Azerbaijan in terms of the money that is feasible out of this. But they can use that actually to adopt a more realistic perspective on what they can get out of these resources. And, based on the simple premise that part of something is better than all of nothing. And it's also premised on the idea that in order for this to work, there has to be coordination, because individually, the political influence of Cyprus or Greece or Israel or Lebanon, even Turkey, is not sufficient to kind of solve the problem on their own. And the gas that they may or may not have is not enough to sort of change the markets on their own. But in conjunction with each other, by coordinating, then they can actually achieve something together. So that realization would be important to set in. And the last piece, the third leg of the stool I would put is that there needs to be progress in Cyprus itself for some sort of solution. And that solution, though, I would offer further, it really needs to come from within Cyprus itself, from Cypriots for Cypriots. And that means Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots together. Both obviously have their reasons for wanting to involve external powers, right? Greek Cypriots want to involve Greece because that means involving NATO. It also means involving the European Union, bigger powers in Europe. Turkish Cypriots want to involve Turkey, of course, because that means involving NATO, and it also means involving, a big giant country to the north. But that comes with problems as well, because at the end of the day, it's the people on Cyprus who have to live with each other in some sort of solution. And I think the danger is what you're seeing in Cyprus is a hardening of the divisions which began in the 1950s and were exacerbated in the 1960s and then made sort of official with a line in 1974 with the Turkish invasion. And so you have an opportunity here to try and push forward some sort of political solution. But I think that the time is becoming of the essence to do that, especially the position taken by the new government in Northern Cyprus seems to be a much harder position than one that traditional agreements or traditional negotiations were based on. So those would be the 3 points I would make in response to your question.
Thank you. That all, Rudy and Andrew, very compelling remarks, and really appreciate that. And I want to say something that someone who was very much involved in the oil and gas field said to me a couple of years ago about the Eastern Mediterranean and the amount of gas and resources that were there, and why he felt that there was such a need to move with great expeditiousness to solve these problems, because they were going to miss out on this window. And what he said, and I'll say this, he said, the amount of gas in the region is more like a hibachi than a big barbecue grill. And he said to fight over this small amount means that these people are literally shooting themselves in their respective feet, because the longer they argue about this, the more other players that you've all mentioned, that you mentioned, Doug, are just going to say, you know what, this is easier elsewhere for greater returns elsewhere. So with that, I want to ask you, Doug, if you could share some of your perspectives on what conditions need to be in place politically and for rule of law and these other things, because we have all heard discussions about how large companies are not really in the market to do business if they feel like they're going to invest and then something's going to happen either politically or legalistically that is going to affect their investments. So if you could talk a little bit about that, Doug, I'd be most appreciative.
Yeah, okay, thank you. First, let me say I agree with Andrew's points about what needs to happen in the region. That you know, there needs to be coordination among the countries and cooperation. And it's, you know, it seems like every few months, some constellation of leaders from the region get together and they talk about how they're all going to work together for a pipeline to Europe or whatever it is. And that's fine. The East Med Gas Forum is fine, but they need to get more concrete about working on these things together, or they're going to be stranded assets, particularly the gas in Cyprus may never be developed. So I think, you know, the companies are looking for okay, the big oil and gas companies will go into places that are geopolitically challenging, like Iraq, for example, or other places, Libya, where they think the return justifies it. And when resources available to them are scarce. Today, there is lots of opportunities to invest in places around the world that are politically stable, like the United States, Brazil, for example, you know, and elsewhere. And as I mentioned, the budgets for all these companies have been cut significantly. There's demand from shareholders to keep up the dividends, and the outlook for energy, particularly for natural gas, is quite uncertain going forward. Again, these pledges for to reach net zero emissions or carbon neutrality by 2050, which big oil and gas companies are making in addition to governments. I think the resources in Egyptian and Israeli waters will continue to be developed. There is demand in those countries, and Israel can trade gas also with selling gas to Jordan now. It can sell some more probably to Egypt, maybe elsewhere. But the real problem is Cyprus, and unless they discover a lot more gas, and companies are willing to take the investment risks because the potential returns are so great, there needs to be some coordination in the region. I agree, some solution or a path towards that on the island. As someone who worked on those issues 20 years ago, I can't say I'm optimistic, but we can still be hopeful. So it's really it's an issue of economics, and it's an issue of political stability, and you don't really have either one in your favor now if you're Cyprus at the moment.
Thank you, Doug. So wanting to be a little less cynical here and maybe a little more optimistic, I'd like to just throw this open to the panel and like to get you all to engage with each other as well here. So if you could all unmute sort of simultaneously and feel free to pop in. I think these are much more interesting instead of just each of you answering, and maybe we can get into a discussion. So we've had a good talk about what conditions need to be in place. I also want to throw out here what I believe is a necessity to work out these issues now, because even going forward, if there's any chance for greener technology to be developed off Cyprus, either be that wind power, or offshore wind platforms, or hydrogen, or anything else like this, we still would need to have the same sort of political actions in place. So do any of you have any ideas you'd like to share and discuss with us today on how you think these steps can go forward? What what would make this not only a better place for investment, but are there things that both the Cyprus governments can do, Northern Cyprus and the Greek Cypriots can do to change these conditions? Are there ways to work together with Greece and Turkey to sort of stand off a little bit? Is there any promise in what just happened this past week with Turkey withdrawing one of its vessels because of this discussion of possibility of EU sanctions? So I want to throw that open for this discussion, because I think we all agree that we have to have a better outcomes on the ground so this can go forward. So let's delve in a little bit to Turkey's actions this past week of removing this vessel, and because of actions that the EU might take. Do you think this has some promise here, or is this just a blip on the radar screen? And whoever wants to speak first, just raise your hand and I will call on you. Or if you don't raise your hand, oh, you raised your hand. I was going to say, otherwise I will pick someone out. Andrew, please go ahead.
I was looking for the raise your hand function on Zoom, but I'm dealing with so many online platforms these days. I don't remember where the raise your hand function is on Zoom. But I mean, so a couple of things sort of to think of with this is that, I mean, withdrawing the Oruç Reis is not, in my view, a kind of great concession on the part of Turkey. I think the NAVTEX for it was due to expire around this time anyway. It wasn't meant to go on, and you know, the boat goes out, it does what it does. It's largely symbolic. It's not like it's going to start extracting massive amounts of gas. It's just an exploratory vessel. It's just meant to be symbolic. And it's back in port, and it probably will come out again at some point and do its stuff. There's a NATO foreign ministers meeting happening now, and then the EU meeting you mentioned, Deb, is happening. I think that the 11th and 12th of this month, so like in about 10 days time. I don't think Turkey is particularly afraid that something will happen, because I don't think that the EU or NATO has demonstrated an ability to coordinate a response on this issue, largely because they don't. There is no coordinated attitude of who's in the right and who's in the wrong on this issue, right? And it's a dispute, and I think that's why Rudy's book is very useful, because it's trying to make a case for, okay, well, let's try to split things and use international law to try to come up with various solutions. I think that the other piece of this, which we haven't quite touched on yet, is that one reason why that is so hard in the case of Cyprus or Greece and Turkey is that this is not an economic issue for these countries. It is a security issue. And so, for example, in Rudy's book, he suggests, you know, the legal one legal precedent to deal with the tiny little Greek island of Castellorizo is to draw a little circle around it and make it its own little pocket, and then allow Turkey to have the exclusive economic zone around that. That's fine, except that if you do that, the economic zone of Greece will no longer touch the economic zone of Cyprus. That this will effectively cut that thread. And that's why the island of Castellorizo is so important for Greece. And that's why it doesn't want to lose a bigger EEZ around it, because if it goes with that legal definition, it just gives you a pocket, it cuts the link to Cyprus. And so those kind of details are the problem of why this is very hard to get it to work. I think, I mean, these are the obstacles that these countries are going to have to overcome if they want to come to some sort of solution.
Rudy, do you want to comment on this? Rudy, unmute, please. Oh, good.
Yes. Dr. Andrew Novo, thank you very much for bringing the example of Castellorizo, which is the most important problem today between Turkey and Greece if they go to court or they applied United Nations law of the sea. What recent jurisprudence has seen in different continents for a similar problem. And I'll give you the one that is very familiar to all of us, the UK Channel Islands. They are a few miles from the Normandy coast, and there are 20, 30, 40 miles force from the UK maritime boundary zone. What they did there, when they went to the International Court of Justice, they have designed an enclave around it, and they have given them the appropriate 6 to 10 miles. It depends on how far it is from the mainland. So what they have done there is that they have said, according to United Nations law of the sea, which was not then at that time existent, that the Channel Islands do not have the right to have a EEZ. Now, Castellarizo, regardless of the history before 1949, when it was French, it was given to the Italian and vice versa, the Castellarizo is more or less when they treat the two coastal states between Italy and France. You have the small Principauté of Monaco. Monaco cannot cut 200 nautical miles there and disrupt a normal equidistance line that comes from both. So they gave them a corridor. The third example, which is similar, is the small island Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon offshore Canada. They are at 3,600 miles away from France. These two islands do not have, according to the book, I did not create that United Nations law of the book. So they give them an enclave right, whether it's 3 miles or 6 miles or 12 miles. So this also applies to the Castellarizo. Now, the book, in one of the maps that you will see, this is exactly by the book. Now, if they cannot agree, they have to go to either the International Tribunal Law of the Sea or the International Court of Justice. So the previous jurisprudence that have been taken into this consideration applies this. And it is true, according to United Nations law of the sea, the maritime boundaries between Greece and Turkey, Greece does not have a common maritime boundaries for Cyprus. That's for sure. Whenever you go, this is the case. Now, if they both sit down and take it by the book, they both lose a little bit, but they both gain a lot with Egypt, with the South and the Southwest. So I hope that I have clarified the point.
Thank you so much, Rudy. We're running short on time, so I want to say a couple of things here before I thank our excellent panelists today. The first is, one of the questions we received is why we have not done a Turkish translation. I want to ensure everyone who is listening in today that this is not a political decision. We are in the process of looking at other languages beyond the 4 that we now have for the book. And one of these issues is getting the right translator to put the book out in Turkey. And as we see more of a demand for this book to be published in Turkish, we will do that as well. But again, please let me assure people that there is no politics in this decision at all. The second thing I want to say is, I want to thank all of our panelists and everyone else who was on here today for their insightful wisdom and expertise that you've shared with us. I also want to say, though, that if Israel and Lebanon can actually sit down on these issues, if Israel and the Palestinians can actually sit down on these issues, then all of those geopolitics and security issues between Greece and Turkey and Cyprus and the parties within Cyprus should be able to do the same. This is not, as we say in the US, rocket science. Sometimes you just have to push all the noise to the side so you can focus on the immediate and take care of this. Because as Doug very appropriately said, this is not a huge window and it's not going to stay open forever. So the longer they play these games, the less likely it is that they're going to be able to develop these resources, and I'd like to say, and any renewable resources going forward to make a difference. So again, I want to thank all of you for participating today. I want to thank Sasha, General Allen, Yelva for being here today, and thank all of our people who've been listening in from around the world. And we greatly appreciate this conversation, and we look forward to being in touch with you all in the future. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you are.